that I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 27th of 2013, so I turned 3 yesterday. My home group is the Change Agents. We meet on Sunday nights at 7:30 at 300 Powell Street in Raleigh. I have a service position in my home group. I have a sponsor, she has a sponsor, I sponsor other women who also sponsor women, which is very exciting. I work with a couple of different service organizations within AA in Raleigh. I hold a position on the steering committee of our intergroup for the Tri-County area, and I work with Tricky Paw, which is the Triangle Committee of Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we put on a big Memorial Day picnic every year out at the Eno River State Park, which is a lot of fun, so I'll have to make sure to send some flyers down here so y'all can come and join us as well. I think that's most of the bookkeeping kind of things and letting you know that I do this and who I am. Like Steve said, I'm from Raleigh, so I was originally born in San Jose, California. I moved to North Carolina when I was 5. I spent my 5th birthday in New Mexico and Arizona, moving across the country, and we landed in Cary. I'm the oldest of 4 children. All 4 of us are within 5 years of each other. So I was born in 85, my sister 86, my other sister 88, and my brother in 90. So we're all very close. We're all kind of, just one group, and so it was my built-in best friends as children. I come from a very normal family. As far as normal is concerned, no one's family is actually normal, and as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that. But when I was a child, I was just oblivious, and I was shielded from most things. And I think it's important to say that I was born an alcoholic. I was born with an alcoholic mind, because as soon as I could put enough words together, subject and verb, and put those things together, I was creating fantasies, and I was telling lies, and the truth was just never good enough for me, and I always had to extrapolate on that. So if it sounded plausible, it would always be set in reality, but it was not what had actually happened. As the oldest, I never really felt like the oldest. I didn't like to draw a lot of attention to myself. I don't like to be in charge. If I could have just blended into the background, I would have been much happier. My sister Amanda, who's the second of us, is the very strong personality, and so she kind of was the stand-in oldest child. We're only 14 months apart, so it wasn't that hard, but it was, never Liz, make Tim stop being stupid. It was always Amanda, make Tim stop being stupid, and I was okay with that because, I just kind of did my own thing. I did well at school. School was always very important to us. We played music. I was always taught that family is all that you need, so I didn't really have a lot of friends. And I wasn't very social to begin with. I always felt outside, and I know that's something that a lot of us say and that we can identify with, but I just really did. Even all through high school, I had people that I played music with, and I had people that I studied with and did schoolwork with, but I didn't have a girlfriend that I would call up on the phone and chat with, we see teenagers do on television and things. And so then I wondered, I was like, well, why am I not like that? I would rather sit in my room and read a book or play the piano than to do those kinds of things. So and all of my siblings have their best friend that they went through with, and I don't have one of those. I have friends now for the first time in my life. But I never had that connection with anybody. I had my first panic attack when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was laying in my bed trying to calm myself down and go to sleep, and I started thinking about the expansiveness of the universe. And it was kind of like one of those, the last scene in Men in Black where there's these slug kind of things with the marbles around their neck, and there's a galaxy inside of a galaxy. And so that's where my 7 or 8-year-old mind went. So instead of calming myself down and going to sleep, it turned into, oh my God, I am smaller than a grain of sand, and I mean absolutely nothing, and what is life, and what is going on, and where do I fit, and where am I, and all of those things. So there wasn't much sleeping at that point in time, and I really freaked myself out. And I wanted to run across the hallway to my parents' room, but then I thought about, well, what am I going to tell them? Why am I freaking out? And so I just stuffed those feelings down and kind of, just let it go and never told anybody about it because they all thought I was pretty strange anyways, and I didn't want to add fuel to their fire. So that's pretty much anything that's remarkable about my childhood. School was normal, went to school, came home, did homework, ate dinner around the table every night at 5:30. My parents are still married. My grandmother lived in the house with us growing up, so really just Norman Rockwell picturesque kind of lifestyle. I graduated 13th in my class of Cary High School. I had a scholarship. I was a teaching fellow at UNC Chapel Hill. So, along the way, it looked very promising. From the outside, everything was fine. I didn't have my first drink or drug until I was 20 years old, just because I wasn't around it when I was in high school, and I was occupied with other things, and so that world didn't even exist to me. And then when I got to college, I felt really lost. I had gone from, Cary High School is not a small school, but then it's not huge either, where I knew a lot of people, and my mom was a teacher there, and I had my siblings. So then I go to UNC Chapel Hill, and it's just a sea of people, it's just people everywhere. And so I felt super insignificant again. And, the depression and the anxiety and the separation, and because I didn't make friends with my suite mates, lots of things. And so schoolwork kind of fell by the wayside. I started working more. My sophomore year, I had lived at home with my parents and then commuted out to Chapel Hill, which then again just separated me that much further. And so I just kind of slid away from school, and it was no longer my priority. But then that kind of stole my identity at the same time, because that was the only thing that I really had. And so I got an apartment living on my own, was working 2 or 3 jobs, still trying to go to school at the same time, and that just wasn't feasible anymore. And so I stopped going to school. I withdrew my junior year and just started working. And I've always worked in restaurants, so it was really easy to find people who drank like I did. Like I said, I was about 20 when all of this started. I remember one of my good friends turned 21 in February, which was about 6 months before I did, and she gave me her old New York license, and she had her new North Carolina license. This girl's name is Anastasia Thoman. It's not like Jane Doe or Jane Smith or, anything kind of, close to generic. It was a very recognizable name, and we used to walk into places one right after the other, and we never got caught. It happened. I also learned early on that if I walked up to a bar and I ordered a Jack and Water, no one was going to card me. I learned if you're not ordering a vodka cranberry, they're not going to question you. So I started drinking hard very early. I found out when I was about 26 years old that my grandfather is also one of us, and he has been in and out of AA for a little over 50 years. And I believe he's just put 6 together for the first time in his life this past October. But like I said, my family's really good at compartmentalizing and keeping secrets. So I never knew that. I had seen my grandfather drink at dinner. I had also seen times when he didn't drink, but nobody talked about it. So most of the time my family had always warned against drinking. We're Irish Catholic, and I watched my dad and his brothers and sisters and my mom's family, and I've never seen my mom drink. She doesn't drink. My dad would drink, he'd drink with football games and Sunday dinners and things like that, but never out of control. But I was just always told, don't drink. And so I didn't know anything about blackouts. I didn't know anything about controlled drinking. I didn't know anything about what normal was or social drinking. But as soon as I learned about those things, I knew that that's not what was, I was never a social drinker. I was always a blackout drinker. I was always an open bottle is an empty bottle. It doesn't matter if it was whiskey, wine, or beer. I was always the last one to be at wherever we were. If it was the bar, I was shutting it down. If it was a house, I was the last one there. You know, it didn't matter if I was passed out at that point in time or not, because that happened on quite a few occasions where I'd wake up and be like, where am I and how did this happen? But, you know, I didn't know anything about those things, and I just thought that that's what happened when you drank, you know? It was fairly normal to me, and I don't know, it eats your soul away. Like, it really does. You know, you think that you're drinking to be a part of a bigger picture, and, you know, you're finding out that I'm really just kind of separating myself. You know, over time, little by slow, people started pulling away from me, and, you know, I learned that I didn't really have real friends, and I had drinking buddies, and I put myself in some really dangerous situations, and it was always my joke that, you know, no one liked 23-year-old Liz. She was a terrible person, and I probably said that when I was like 24. But it was a bad time in my life, you know, not a time that I'm really proud of. So there's this one time that I'll tell you about that I had been downtown Raleigh drinking with a couple of my girlfriends, and it was Tequila Tuesday. I had worked all day. I was in my bartending uniform, you know, so I had Crocs on, like, you know, the black clothes. And Tequila Tuesday comes around, and like, I ended up dancing on a bar in Crocs. Like, that's just, you know, not something that you really want to do. And later that night, you know, because I was always okay to drive. I never let anybody else drive me. No one ever took my keys. Nothing was going to stop me. And so I had an old 94 Jeep Cherokee, and that thing was like a tank, you know, like it was just solid. On my way home that night, driving home in a blackout like I did many, many times, I hit something on my way home. And to this day, I have no idea what I hit. But I do know that I took the same route from Martin Street that I always take back home. And I drove that route multiple times for days afterwards, looking for a pole that was knocked over, looking for like a cement barrier that had blue paint on it or something. But I have no idea what I hit. I didn't have any idea what I hit until the next morning when I woke up and I got into the truck and put it in reverse to go to work, and I heard a terrible noise, and I was like, what is that? And I got out and walked around and saw that I had crushed the entire front right side of the Jeep in and had worn about a 1/4 inch of the tire all the way out. And so how I had even made it home without that tire popping or, you know, somebody seeing me or anything like that is just beyond me, you know. And so I couldn't drive to work. So I called somebody, you know, to come and get me. And like, that's the insanity of that situation, is that I had left my phone charger at work, so my cell phone was effectively dead. I had no car to get to work. I had to go and walk into the office of the apartment building and call someone continuously because it was the only phone number I had memorized, and he didn't pick up numbers that he didn't know until I called like 12 times in a row. And I had to call him to come back and to get me and to take me into work. And I got to work, and I can just remember I was shaking and I was so nervous because, you know, I mean, granted, there was no blood on the front of the car, so I knew I was okay in that way because that was the first thing. But then, you know, I don't know if I'm on a camera somewhere or if somebody was on the street and they saw me, and, you know, just that fear of the unknown of, oh my God, how did this happen? Like, I have no idea. And I don't think I was at work for more than about 2 hours before I started drinking again, you know, because I couldn't be me. I couldn't be where I was. I couldn't deal with who I was and what I was doing. You know, some people that I've spoken to, some lucky people, some smart people, whatever you want to call them, stop drinking after things like that. But that's not my story. You know, I continued on for a few more years and continued to make messes like that I somehow always manipulated the situation and managed to come out unscathed. So about 25, I was in a relationship, not the best of relationships, you know, not the best that we find ourselves in. And we had been together for about 1.5 years at that point in time, 2 years. And we had, you know, been in Raleigh. We decided to move to Durham, you know, nice. He didn't like Raleigh because I knew too many people, and I was always out partying. And alcohol had become a big factor. It was a never-ending cycle of I would get drunk, he would get angry, he'd lock me out of the house, the cops would come, blah, 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 you know. So we decided that we were going to move out of Raleigh because I knew too many people. We're going to move to Durham because 20 miles down the road is going to do a lot. And, you know, we were convinced that it was because he didn't have any friends, because he didn't like my friends, therefore he didn't want to go out and have to see any of my friends. And he was tired of walking down one of the streets in downtown Raleigh and having people tell him where I had gone. So we moved out to Durham, and I had a good job, he had a good job, but, you know, the cycle just continued. And continued and continued, and it was about that time that we moved out there that I found out that I was pregnant, and I was terrified and horrified and not happy at all. None of those feelings that we're supposed to feel, you know, when we're going to have a baby. I never wanted to have children because I know that I'm sick, and I've struggled with depression my entire life, and mental illness runs in my family. My uncles joke that we don't need just a wing in a hospital, but we should have our own like family compound mental hospital. And I mean, so like we at least have a sense of humor about it, but at the same time we don't have a very appropriate sense of humor, and you know, it's not something that's really addressed and spoken about. But I didn't see the point in passing that possibility on to somebody else. You know, that scared me. I, as a child, never really felt like I had a great relationship with my mother, which is, you know, something that a lot of women say, but I just didn't. You know, I always felt different than my other sisters, and you know, that for some reason I wasn't lovable. And so then I was also terrified of being a mom and being incapable of loving somebody. Because at this point in time, I was also very worried that I just didn't have feelings because I was so devoid of anything in my life. You know, I wasn't happy, I wasn't excited, I didn't have goals, I didn't have dreams. It was just same in, day out, when can I drink, what can I drink, what can I do? And so the idea of having a baby and then having a baby with this guy was just, I mean, I felt trapped, and I was terrified, and I cried for weeks. And, you know, I respect every woman's choice, you know, to choose to carry a pregnancy or to not. That's not something that I could do. And so for those first 2 months, pretty much, I drank and used harder than I ever had in my life, just hoping that nature would take care of that, and, you know, whatever God was out there would see that I was no person fit to have a child and to be responsible for that. Well, that didn't happen, so then I decided I had to get my act together. And, you know, cigarettes were easy. I didn't want cigarettes at all, like just drop those. Drinking, not so much, because, you know, I had to plan. I'm kind of an OCD planner. I have to have the idea of what's going to happen in a game plan. So I knew that if I showed up to Sunday dinner with my family and didn't have a glass of wine, everyone would be like, what's wrong with Liz? Like, why isn't she drinking? Because no one ever saw me without something in my hand. So I waited for those first 12 weeks and then told my family and then stopped drinking. You know, I smoked marijuana every day of my pregnancy, I will tell you that. So I was dry through my pregnancy, but I wasn't devoid of all substances. And, you know, thank God I have a perfectly happy, healthy, well-adjusted, smart, beautiful little girl. And, no, I didn't really have much of anything to do with that other than, you know, simply being an incubator, because there were just so many emotions and so many things. Like, I got put on medication while I was pregnant because I couldn't deal with the emotions and just all sorts of things. So basically I had her and was immediately struggled really hard with postpartum depression and into postpartum psychosis, and you know, started drinking again at when she was about 6 weeks old. And because I wasn't eating, so I couldn't breastfeed anymore, so I was like, well, there's absolutely no point in me not drinking because I don't have to worry about that. So, you know, and that's where I've seen that this disease is absolutely progressive. You know, I went for however many months without drinking, And as soon as I picked up a drink, within a day or two, I was back to drinking a fifth of whiskey every day. And with a newborn, that's not advisable. And it's frowned upon. And for for good reason, you know, like that's just not something that responsible adults do. And I was not even good at pretending I was a responsible adult. Like I could not keep it together. So basically that all culminated in her being about 4.5 months old, and he had been at work and I had been at home drinking and drugging all day, and he called and said he was on his way home, and I was like, well, I gotta make myself look presentable so that he can't tell that I'm drunk, even though he always could. And so I went into the bathroom, and I ended up passing out on the toilet. And then he walked in to find our 4.5-month-old baby on the couch with like my dog and the 3 cats running around, and I was passed out in the bathroom. Not my best moment, and you know, it took me a long time to really come to terms with that. Like that was a very, very bad night. It involved a lot of time spent with the police. I don't even remember most of it. It's probably better that way. But I do remember sleeping by the front door and hoping, you know, that they would come back at some point in time. But they didn't. He wouldn't even answer my phone calls. I just knew they were gone, and I didn't know why or how or where they had gone or anything like that. And, you know, when I came to the next morning, still wasn't there, still wasn't taking my phone calls. So I just, you know, I didn't know what to do. And I got into the shower, and I cried in a ball at the bottom of the shower until the water ran cold. And then I had been treated at UNC Chapel Hill through my entire pregnancy for my depression and things, and they have a postpartum depression wing at that hospital. It's a very small wing, but I went there and saw the crisis counselor, and they recommended that I check myself in there, and so that's what I did that day. And that was the first time anyone recommended that I should go to AA. You know, I used words like I fell asleep, and he used words like she passed out, you know, and so, you know, we just had 2 very different perceptions on this whole thing. You know, my parents were immediately freaked out because they knew my drinking was bad. They didn't know it was that bad. They didn't know anything about how terrible the relationship was and what it actually looked like inside of our walls until my sister had been called in. And so, you know, my parents did what parents do, and they tried to love me, and I saw someone that I could take advantage of. You know, so while I was in that hospital for 7 days, it was right before Thanksgiving, you know, they were like, you're going to come home, you're going to live with us, you're going to get the baby, you're going to get back on your feet, we're going to make it a dry house, like this is all going to be okay. Because, you know, now at this point in time, CPS is involved, and it's just spiraling out of control, and I'm just counting down the minutes until I can have my shoelaces back and go get a drink. You know, so I go home with my parents, and I immediately start sneaking alcohol and drugs into the house. You know, I don't care. I mean, I don't remember caring. I don't think I cared at all. I should have, but I didn't. And I always say now, if I expended half of the energy into getting sober at that time that I did into sneaking booze and drugs into the house, it would have been much simpler, you know, because I had to scheme, and the purses kept getting bigger, and there were holes under bushes, and just, I mean, the whole thing, you know. They would hide keys from cars so that I couldn't go anywhere. It was terrible. So that was October of 2011. So January of 2012, he filed for custody of our daughter after we had had another large altercation, and I had gotten a restraining order. And so then he filed for custody. And, you know, at that point in time, I was just really over this whole life and, like, mother and, you know, daughter and all of these things. And I was tired of trying. So I just didn't even care anymore. And I stopped hiding it. I stopped really making any effort at all. I did things that I'm incredibly not proud of. You know, I've hit my mother in the face. I broke through my sister's door with a crowbar because she had my clothes on the other side and had locked me out. I got a DUI coming home from my best friend's wedding that April. I made the front page of the Slammer in a bridesmaid's dress. That's Jerry Weaver's favorite part of my story. He finds it amusing. But I was on the bottom of, I was under the fold, so you had to pick it up and move it over to be able to find me. I wasn't right there, but I was there. I was in color. And these are times when most people would second guess their life decisions, and I just, no, didn't even care. I continued drinking, lost my job, lost my license. That October, I lost custody of my daughter. I'm pretty grateful for that today because I was not able to be a mother at all. I couldn't take care of myself. My family was taking care of her, and I was just there. But I was getting drunk every day and passing out, and I couldn't take care of her. And that's been the hardest thing, is that I thought I would remember most of it, but now when I watch my friends with their kids that are about that age, I realize I don't have any memories of her when she was that age. And that's hard at times. I find a few videos here and there of a few seconds at the time, but I can always hear in my voice in the background that I'm drunk, and nobody else can probably recognize that, but I know. And so, it's even hard when I find those memories that are missing because it's still there. And, it's only through the grace of AA that I've been able to move through that guilt, shame, and remorse, because that's all that is. Like, that's that black thing that weighs on my heart when I have to think about those things. So I lost custody of her in October of 2012, and leaving the courtroom that day, my parents asked if I wanted to go and check myself in somewhere. And I said, no, because now I only get her every other weekend. Why would I want to limit my time even more? Like, why would I do that? That makes no sense. The judge suggested that I go to 2 AA meetings a month, and so, to me that was like a death sentence. I was like, 2 AA meetings a month? Are you kidding me? Like, what am I going to do there? Like, I don't have a problem. You all have a problem. You all have a problem with the way that I drink. Like, I don't have a problem. It's all of you looking at me and telling me that I shouldn't be this way. I needed to go to AA to learn how to drink smarter, to learn how to not get caught, to learn how to not get as sloshed as I possibly could. I had no idea what AA was actually about or what it offered or what it did. To me, I looked at the steps before I had a sponsor, I will say that. And I was just like, it's ridiculous. That has nothing to do with drinking. Steps for me are, don't drive past the liquor store with money in your pocket. Because if I drive past the liquor store with money, I am going to stop. So I tried to control my life that way. I was like, I can just lock myself in the house and I won't drink. 4 hours later, I'm walking to the gas station. It was absolutely impossible for me to be in my skin or in life without some kind of mind mood altering substance. And so I stayed drunk for another 3 months. And then finally in January, my dad and my sister Amanda, who were pretty much the only ones that wanted anything to do with me, and they didn't really want anything to do with me, they just really felt bad for me. They sat me down at a Panera on a Sunday afternoon, and they were like, we can't do anything for you. We have done everything we possibly can. We have, my dad tried making me dump bottles of whiskey down the sink because he would go in my room and find like 5 of them hidden around. And then he'd find the empty ones and just be like, what's even more terrifying is that these are empty and that these still have something. Like, when is the last time you cleared bottles out of your room? I never really had the heart to tell him. It was only like 3 days ago. And so he thought that by me actively pouring alcohol down the sink, it was going to, something would click, something would be there. But it didn't. The whole time I was just going, this is the biggest waste of whiskey I have seen in quite some time. How am I going to get to the store to get more? And, they said to me, if you had cancer, you would go to the hospital and you would get help. And you have a disease and there is nothing that we can do for you. In the big book, they go through the 4 different types of the alcoholic. They describe them in progressing severity. The first time I heard that was at my kitchen table, and my dad had been on the internet like searching for something that would make sense to me, and he read those things to me. And he, by the time he got to like alcoholic number 2, he was like, what really scares me is that I think you're about there. And in my heart, again, I didn't have the heart to tell him and be like, I passed that a long time ago. Like, I am full on alcoholic number 4. Like, you just, because I was that good at like faking it and just compartmentalizing it and trying not to make it an issue. So basically, they said I had to go to rehab, and I was like, rehab's for people like Lindsay Lohan that are completely out of control. But I didn't realize that like normal people, like people like me, go to rehab and they need that also. And that was the best gift that my parents or my family could have ever given to me. And I asked for a week so that I could get my affairs in order before I had to leave, because I was very busy and I had a lot of things going on. So by Friday, they kind of got on me and they were like, so you asked for a week, what have you done about finding somewhere to go? And I had done nothing, I just sat around and dreaded the day that I wasn't going to be able to drink anymore. And so I went upstairs to my room and I filled out some stuff online and I talked to a few people on the phone, and I found this place in Arizona called A Better Today Recovery Services. And I spoke with the intake man on the phone there, and he was in recovery also. And for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, but something in my heart just told me that this was going to be an option, that this held some kind of promise. So we made arrangements, and I, got a plane ticket out to Arizona. But I still had Saturday because I wasn't leaving till Sunday. So Saturday, I just hit it hard, and everybody knew it. Like, again, my dad had read online to expect that, if someone's going to rehab, that there's going to be a big bash before that. And, they tried to make like a nice dinner and, a going away kind of thing. I vaguely remember steak on my plate, like, because I had asked for, these things that he buys, that he makes, and I was so drunk. That night ended with, I walked to the gas station because I was out of beer, was yelling at the cashier because my license was expired because I didn't have a license, and she wouldn't sell me the beer, and I really, really needed this beer, and I was like, I can get on a plane with this expired license. Like, I talked to the FAA today because that's what I'm doing in the morning, so what do you mean you can't sell me this beer with expired license? Like, if this is good post 9/11 for the airlines, it damn well sure is good enough for me to buy beer. Well, she did not buy me beer, and luckily I did not get arrested. But later that night, they found me hiding under my bed crying, and that's how I ended my night, because that's what life had turned into. So I got up the next morning and I packed my things and I got on a plane, and that was the first day that I can remember since I was 20 years old that I did not put any kind of substance into my body. And it was a long plane ride. I played a lot of Candy Crush, but I made it there, and they picked me up. And I showed up to rehab sober, right? And that's like the first miracle in my life. But that's just how done I was at that point in time. I was just over it. So the girls in the house, they were very confused by my very with it state of mind, because apparently it's not normal to show up to rehab sober. So, I said that I was going to be there for 28 days. And around day 11, 12, 13, having a drink at the airport on the way home still sounded like a good idea to me. And for whatever reason, that scared me instead of seeming like, a light at the end of the tunnel. And so at this point in time, I was like starting to learn to like listen to other people and to interact with other people and to take suggestions and to, kind of allow myself to be taught. There was just a smidge of willingness, just a smidge. And, so that's what I did. I brought it up. I said, hey, I'm kind of scared because I'm supposed to be leaving in like 2 weeks, and I don't think that I've kicked this thing. Like, I think that I still want to drink. And they were like, well, maybe you should stay for a little bit longer. And I was like, maybe, I'll see. And I called my parents, and they said that I could absolutely stay longer. So 28 days turned into 45, which turned into 60, which turned into 75. And at that point in time, I was like, well, I might as well just stay for the full 90. I mean, I kind of like it here. And, in that time, like I said, I was gifted with desperation because I was just so over all of it. And I truly believe that. And that's why relapse isn't a part of my story, because once I finally gave in and made a conscious effort and a conscious decision to seek recovery, I haven't gone back. And I have no desire to go back, and going back scares the crap out of me. So over that time where I became teachable, I became willing, I learned how to be honest, because that was, just something that I wasn't, I remember walking into that house the first night and making a conscious decision to be honest. I was like, well, if someone asks me a question, I am just going to say the first thing that comes to mind, because that's probably the truth. Or, so at that point in time, I couldn't tell you what my favorite color was. I couldn't tell you anything about me, and I didn't know anything about myself. So, there were a lot of times that things would come out of my mouth, and I would just immediately be like, I have no idea why I said that. That is nothing even close to the truth. This is really the answer to that question. And it's not as bad anymore, but every once in a while I still find that happening. But not nearly. It feels so weird and so bad now, which is just mind-blowing to me, because that was my norm. That's how I lived. I would lie about everything and anything. So in that course of time, when I started taking some suggestions and I became teachable and open and honest, I found a sponsor, and I know that the universe, which is my God, put her in my path directly. She was from England, and she was in Arizona taking care of her mother, who had cancer. And I heard her at a meeting, a women's meeting, speaking on the 5th step. And at this point in time, I had heard about this 5th step, and I was starting to understand why these steps existed and what they did and how all of this worked together. And I had heard stories about how people get to the 4th step and they get stuck, or they stop and they go out, and I couldn't do that. That could not be me. And so I knew I had to get to the 5th step. And so I heard her speaking on the 5th step, and I was like, she's going to be my sponsor. She doesn't know it, but she's going to be my sponsor. And so after the meeting, one of the girls introduced me to her, and I asked her, and she said that she would. And that woman came twice a week, because we were allowed on Mondays and Tuesdays to work with our sponsor for an hour and a half each day. I was the only girl who had a sponsor who came on both days to work with me. And that woman came every Monday and every Tuesday and read the book with me and talked with me and taught me how to be a person. And I had the first real relationship with another human being with Cary. And she's amazing. She's still in my life today. And I know that she was exactly what I needed at that point in time. And, there's no explanation for why a girl from Cary, North Carolina ends up in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then a woman from London is also in Scottsdale, and then we have the same story, and we just connect like that. Other than that's just how the world works, and that's how God works in my life. So on my 90th day of rehab, she picked me up, and we did my 5th step, and it was the most glorious day of my life. I say that in all honesty and all seriousness, because I was so ready to get it out. I was like, I've been carrying all of this stuff for my entire life. I don't want it anymore. I can't have it. I need you to have it. And so we sat there for hours, and we just went over everything. And, at the end, she asked me, she said, is there anything that you're holding on to? Is there anything that you haven't told me? And I knew that there was. And I really wanted to hold on to it. I really didn't want to talk about it, because I had never talked about it before in my life. And, again, that little piece inside of me that wanted to recover more than I wanted to get drunk won out over my disease, and I let it out, and I gave it to her. And that night, I spent the first night in 90 days alone in a hotel room, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt happy. And I had never known what happy actually was. And I was comfortable, and I didn't have the TV on, and I didn't have the radio on. I wasn't on my phone. I wasn't talking to anybody. I was literally sitting on the edge of my bed staring at the wall, just grinning, because I finally felt like myself. At check-in every morning in rehab, they had this list in the middle of the room that was emotions, and you had to identify with one to start the day and to begin the conversation. And they'd be like, Liz, how are you feeling today? And my answer would be, I'm here. I feel present. And they were like, that's not an emotion, try again. And I tried so hard for present to be an emotion because that's all that I felt for the longest time. But finally, like, I could feel something, I could do something. And the next day I went to the Grand Canyon because I had always wanted to go there. And so that was my congratulations to myself. And I had a wonderful spiritual experience in the biggest ditch on earth. And, hiking around there. But for the first time in my life, there was a man on the bus next to me on our way up there. I took one of those, like, guided tour things. And he was a European man, and he had bought beer at one of the stops. And he offered me a beer while I was sitting back there. And I probably looked ridiculous, and he was probably like, what is wrong with this girl? But I just kind of, like, smiled and got real giddy, and I was like, no, thank you. And, I sat there for the next 2 hours, and I was like, I just said no to a beer. I just said no to a beer. And when I got to my room, I called my parents, because I remember it was my brother's birthday, and they were at the bar that I used to work at. And so, he was drinking, my parents were there, and I was like, hey, guess what? I just said no thank you to a beer. And to them, it was no big deal. It was like, well, duh, I hope you said no to a beer. And for me, I was like, you don't understand. In 7 years, I have never, ever, ever said no to anything. And for the first time, I said no. And I still get all proud and, like, giddy about that now. That was a huge moment for me. It hasn't always been great, but I do know that my first year I was probably pretty obnoxious at my home group because at about 6 months I moved back to North Carolina, and I was just so happy for no apparent reason. And so I would share at Cary young people, and I would just be like, everyone talks about how terrible sobriety is. I am so happy. And they were like, what is wrong with this girl? It's like Pollyanna in AA. And I would call Terry all the time, and I would be like, I think I'm missing something. I think I'm doing something wrong. Why am I not miserable like everybody else? And so, like, I desperately wanted to feel like I was a part of everything because I just felt weird. I didn't feel like I was really an alcoholic because everything was great, but my life still sucked. Like, if you looked at it from the outside, you'd be like, well, she doesn't have custody of her child. She has to be supervised at all times with her child. She has no license. She has no car. She doesn't really have a job. Yeah, like, what's going for me? But just on the inside, I was so happy, and I was just great. Like, it was awesome. And then I finally got a sponsor in Cary, and because I decided I needed someone face-to-face and not just over Skype anymore. And Terry was like, great, now we can just be friends. Like, you don't have to call me about these things. We can just be friends and chat. And so I got a sponsor there. I worked the steps again. I did another 5th step. And I stopped when I got sober. And I was like, and then I was sober. And she was like, and? I was like, I don't know. That's when I got sober. And she's like, well, what's happened in the past year and a half? Like, there's got to be other stuff that should be on your 4th step. And, that. And I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense, So then I got rid of that stuff too. And that's where I've kind of learned to incorporate that into my life. The steps changed my life. When we went back to court for custody over Dara, when I was 18 months sober, it did not go the way that I wanted it to, not by any stretch of the imagination. And that's okay. Partway through that custody hearing, I knew it wasn't going to go the way that I wanted it to. And there was a huge internal struggle between what I know God's will is and what I wanted. And I knew that it wasn't my time. And I told my family that, and they were like, what are you talking about? And, I know that everything happens for a reason, and I just had to let it go. And I was really upset with myself that one night because for the first time in a year and a half, a drink actually sounded like a feasible idea. But that's why I was grateful that I learned early on that I didn't get sober for my daughter. I got sober for me, and because this is the life that I want to live, and this is the life that I'm meant to live. Because if I had gotten sober for my daughter, I would have been drunk that night. I called up my sponsor, leaving court, crying, and I was like, are you going to a meeting tonight? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to the 8 o'clock. And I said, well, I'm not going to make it to 8 o'clock. I'm going to go to the 6 o'clock, So at that point in time, I was a vegetarian. So after the meeting, I went out and I relapsed on meat because I just felt like I needed to do something. Like I just needed something that I hadn't been doing. I needed something different. And for a little while that worked until the stomach ache hit in the middle of the night. And then I was like, that pork tenderloin was a terrible idea. But it was great at the time. It gave me what I needed. But 3 years later, it's still an interesting ride. My ups are not nearly as up and my downs are not nearly as down. I work 2 jobs. I still don't have, even equal custody of my daughter, but I do get to spend good quality time with her, and I don't have to be supervised anymore, which is awesome. I have my license back. I bought the first car that's been titled in my name in 5 years, this past June. So the things that people judge your life by are starting to get better, but I don't even care about any of those things because I can just be happy all the time. And I'm useful to people. So I manage a restaurant, and it's not the healthiest place to work, but I know that I get to help in those ways. My general manager says things like, you're my breath of common sense. Like, you help me keep calm and to make good decisions. And no one would have ever said that about 23-year-old Liz or Liz from 4 years ago. That's just, and because I was talking to him the other day, and he was like, it just blows my mind that you could have even been like that because you're just so controlled and centered and calm and all of these things. And I almost laughed because I was like, yeah, I was none of that. Like, you don't want to see what I was like. So it's just been amazing, and I love helping people, and I love coming to meetings, and I love traveling about, and I love my life today. And I guess that's really all that I have. So thanks for listening to me.